I stepped out of the cab with nothing but a duffel bag on my shoulder and 12 years of service behind me. The Colorado air felt thinner than I remembered, or maybe it was just the weight in my chest. The street was the same, lined with maples and quiet houses, but the brick place at the corner of my grandfather's house didn't feel like home anymore. I had dreamed about this moment through deployments, through months in windowless cyber command centers, through nights when the only voices I heard were encrypted signals bouncing across the globe. Coming back to Boulder, back to the house I had been promised, was supposed to feel like closure. Instead, it felt like walking into someone else's life. The porch light was on, glowing faintly. For a second, I let myself think maybe they were waiting for me. Maybe Laura, my younger sister, had told Dad I was finally coming home. Maybe the years apart could be bridged. That fantasy lasted all of 5 seconds. Before I even reached the steps, the intercom buzzed. "You can't just show up here," Laura's voice snapped through the speaker. I froze, staring at the door. "Laura, it's me," I said, steady as I could. "I just got back. I want to see Mom and Dad." Her reply was colder than the mountain wind. "Mom doesn't want to see you. Neither does Dad. This isn't your home anymore, Morgan. You left, you disappeared." That cut deeper than any enemy I'd faced overseas. I had bled for this country, carried clearances that senators couldn't spell, and here was my own sister treating me like a trespasser. "I'm not disappearing," I said. "This house was promised to me, Grandpa told me himself." Laura didn't blink. She leaned out the upstairs window, arms folded. "You're not in the will, you're not even on the deed, you're nobody here. Daff." And just like that, the door slammed. I could have left. I could have called a lawyer quietly, avoided the spectacle. But when 2 police officers pulled up minutes later, I realized Laura had already escalated. The younger cop was tense, hand near his belt. The older one, buzz-cut, military posture. He recognized the ribbons on my uniform. "Lieutenant Colonel Whitfield?" he asked cautiously. "Yes," I said. "Ma'am," the younger one interrupted, reading off his notes. "This property is listed under Laura Thatcher and Richard Whitfield. You don't have legal access. We're going to need you to step back." The gate clicked shut in my face. The same gate my grandfather built with his own hands, the one I used to swing on as a kid. I forced my jaw tight, my fists locked at my sides. I'd handled interrogation rooms where enemies lied through their teeth. I'd handled networks designed to collapse governments. But nothing prepared me for being told I didn't exist in my own family. I didn't argue. Soldiers learn quickly that yelling only makes you look weak. Instead, I walked away, past the cruiser, past neighbors pretending not to watch. 2 blocks down, I parked myself in my beat-up sedan, coat zipped to my chin. Through the windshield, I could still see the house glowing warm, as if it belonged to a happy family. There was even a sign on the lawn, tilted to the side, "Private sale, no agents." I stared until the letters blurred. That broke something in me. Not Bahrain, not the deployments that stretched into silence, not even the day I signed my discharge papers and realized my military career was over. None of those moments crushed me like seeing "Private sale" on the lawn of the house I'd been promised. Hours passed. The uniform I'd worn to my discharge ceremony dug into my shoulders, sharper now, like an insult pressed against my skin. Through the window, I spotted Dad in the living room, upright as always, posture like he was still running boardrooms instead of sitting in retirement. He never once looked toward the street. To him, I didn't exist. Then my phone buzzed. A single message, no name, "Return to base, there's nothing here for you." It was Laura's style, cold, dismissive. But maybe it was Dad. Either way, the message cut deeper than any wound. For the first time in years, I felt real defeat. That's when it hit me. If my sister thought she could erase me with signatures and my father thought silence would finish the job, they didn't understand who I was. I wasn't built to surrender. And before we move on, let me throw this to you. If your own family tried to erase you, your name, your house, everything, what would you do? Drop a comment below. I want to know if you'd fight back or walk away. And hey, if stories like this hit close to home, make sure you subscribe. We've got plenty more family revenge stories, and trust me, you don't want to miss them. The sky turned pale with dawn before I finally left the car. The sun lit up the rooftops gold, but the house still looked cold, like a fortress. I didn't bother knocking again. Instead, I walked toward a cafe a few blocks away, trying to steady my breath. At a corner table, someone waited for me. Ruth Brooks, sharp-eyed, same as I remembered. She slid a tablet across the table before I could even order coffee. 1450 Windmere Lane, she said quietly. That's your grandfather's house, right? My pulse hammered. Yes. She tapped the screen. Stonebridge Holdings LLC, that's who owns it now. Ruth's tablet screen glared back at me, the name Stonebridge Holdings LLC stamped across the deed like a brand. My chest tightened, and the coffee I hadn't ordered yet suddenly felt like the only thing that could steady me. I sat there, silent, and for a moment, my head spun backward, not to battlefields, not to classified briefings, but to bolder summers that should have felt safe. I remembered being 12, knees scraped raw, sitting on the porch steps of that same house after Dad had barked at me for tracking dirt inside. Laura was 9, tucked under his arm, all dressed up in a white sundress she never would have worn on her own. He called her his little lady while I stood there, sweaty and embarrassed, holding a baseball glove. That was the dynamic. I was the soldier in training even before I signed my first enlistment papers. She was the princess. By high school, the pattern only deepened. Laura got the cheerleading uniform and a car for her 16th birthday. I got told to toughen up and stop acting like college was my ticket out. Dad insisted I'd be better off with discipline instead of education. Funny thing is, he wasn't wrong, I thrived in the army. But the message was clear, I was only worth something in uniform, without it, I was nothing. That memory stung harder now that I was standing in front of Ruth, uniform pressed sharp but stripped of authority outside the gates of a military base. Stonebridge is a shell, Ruth said, snapping me back. Formed 6 months ago, guess who signed off the filings? I clenched my jaw. Laura. Ruth shook her head. Brian Calloway. Your brother-in-law. Logistics manager with connections I don't like the smell of. It figured. Brian had always been slippery. The guy showed up at family dinners in $1,000 suits and fake charm, telling stories about big shipments and exclusive contracts but never giving details. I used to think he was exaggerating to look important. Turns out, he was hiding something bigger. Why would Dad let this happen? I muttered. Ruth's eyes narrowed. Because he's not just letting it happen, he's part of it. The transfer isn't just your sister's doing, Charles's signature is all over the paperwork, they cut you out clean. My stomach twisted. My father, the man who once barked at me for missing curfew, who treated rules like gospel, had signed his name on a fraud to erase me from my own inheritance. I thought back to the day of Grandpa's funeral. Everyone else stood in black suits and black hats, but he'd pulled me aside, his hand trembling on my shoulder. The house is yours, Morgan. He whispered. Don't let anyone talk you out of it, you've earned it. At the time, I thought he just meant I'd kept the family proud by serving. Now I realized he meant something literal, the deed, the property, the legacy. He knew my father would try to take it away. My throat tightened. I wasn't angry yet. Not fully. What I felt was older, like the same sting from childhood when I'd watched Dad brag about Laura's report card while ignoring the ROTC medal I'd fought to win. Ruth slid another page across the table. A notary's stamp, already suspended for falsifying documents, marked the fake transfer. It's sloppy enough that we can fight this, she said. I nodded, though my hands had curled into fists on the table. It wasn't just about signatures. It was about decades of being told I wasn't enough, of Laura being paraded around as the Whitfield success story, while I broke myself in silence overseas. I walked out of the cafe with Ruth's files in my bag, the weight of paper heavier than the Kevlar I'd worn in the sandbox. My boots crunched against the sidewalk, and every step dragged up another memory. Like the Thanksgiving when Dad made me carve the turkey while Brian toasted Laura for marrying up, or the Christmas when Mom handed Laura diamond earrings and gave me socks with the receipt still taped to the box. Those scars had been buried under missions, rank, and duty, but now they were tearing open, fresh and raw. I stopped in front of the house again that evening. Porch lights still glowing. Curtains still drawn. Inside, Laura and Dad were probably drinking wine and congratulating themselves on outsmarting me. But I wasn't a kid standing on the porch anymore. I wasn't even just a soldier. I was someone they'd underestimated, and if the army had taught me anything, it was that underestimation was fatal. I didn't knock. I didn't shout. I just stood there long enough for the neighbors to notice, long enough for Laura to peek out the curtain with that smug smirk she always wore when she thought she'd won. Then I turned and walked away, phone buzzing in my pocket. Ruth again. "We need to talk strategy," her message read. For the first time since stepping off that cab, a spark of focus burned through the fog. I had lived my entire adult life on missions. And like it or not, this was one. The streetlight flickered above me as I scrolled through the PDFs Ruth had forwarded. Page after page carried my name, but not my handwriting. The signature on the deed looked like a child had traced it with their left hand. Sloppy, obvious to anyone who actually knew how I signed. Yet somehow, it had passed county checks. I forwarded one of the pages to Ruth with a single line. "Not mine." Her reply came back instantly. "Exactly. And I know how they pulled it off." She called, and I answered on the second ring. "The notary they used? Suspended last year for falsifying DMV records. He stamped your deed transfer anyway, slid it right through before anyone noticed. So Laura and Brian forged it, and Dad gave cover," I said flatly. "That's the picture," Ruth replied. "They timed it 3 months ago, right before your discharge. They knew you'd be too busy wrapping up in command to pay attention." No. My teeth clenched so tight I could hear the crack in my jaw. They hadn't just stolen a house. They had stolen my name, and by extension, my record. They knew damn well I was out of reach, too buried in clearance files and exit briefings to check county records. I leaned against my car hood, staring at the warm glow of the house across the street. Laura had just pulled the curtains shut, smug silhouette disappearing into the light. The anger built in my gut, but I forced it down. Soldier don't lash out, we channel. By the next morning, Ruth and I were sitting in her cramped downtown office, walls lined with case files and a coffee maker that had seen better years. She spread the documents across the desk like it was a battlefield map. "They filed a new will 1 month after your grandfather passed," she explained, tapping the paper. "This version leaves everything to Charles and Laura. The original, the one you told me about, is gone." "Gone," I repeated. She nodded. "Which means it was either destroyed or hidden. If we can prove the later one was coerced, forged, or inconsistent, we've got a case. But right now, on paper, you don't exist." That word again. Don't exist. It stuck to my skin like acid. I pulled out the small external drive I'd kept tucked away through every deployment. "Grandpa asked me to safeguard this years ago, said it had backups of everything important. I never even opened it, too busy." Ruth's eyes lit up. "If the original will or even a video statement is on there, it could blow this open." The thought that Grandpa had trusted me more than his own son should have comforted me. Instead, it just deepened the wound. He must have known exactly what Charles was capable of. We plugged it in, folders filled the screen, most labeled with simple names: house expenses, family photos, maintenance logs, then, one folder at the bottom, legacy. Inside were scans of old property deeds, letters, and what stopped my breath video files. The thumbnails showed my grandfather, frail, but clear-eyed, speaking straight into the camera. Ruth clicked the first one, his voice filled the room. "This house goes to Morgan. She served her country, she earned it. I want no one else trying to interfere." The video was timestamped 3 days before he died. Ruth leaned back, stunned. "That's it, that's the original intent. It doesn't matter what they filed later, this shows what he wanted." I swallowed hard, throat thick. For once, it wasn't about proving myself. Grandpa's words proved it for me. Still, the anger didn't fade. Laura hadn't just lied, she'd looked me in the eye on that porch and told me I was nobody. And she'd said it knowing she had buried this evidence under corporate filings and forged ink. The bile rose higher when Ruth pulled up another document. "Look here. Logistics contracts tied to Stonebridge. They used your clearance codes, Morgan. This isn't just family betrayal. This is federal fraud. Brian's smug face flashed in my mind, the expensive suits, the fake humility. He'd wormed his way into our family like a parasite, and now he was using my credentials, the ones I spent 12 years earning, to line his own pockets. I slammed my hand on the desk, coffee mugs rattling. They think they can erase me on paper and profit from my name in the same breath? Ruth didn't flinch. That's exactly what they think. But they underestimated you. And frankly, they underestimated me. Her smirk was the first thing all day that calmed me. That night, I drove past the house again, just to see if I could catch Brian coming or going. Instead, I caught something else. 2 black vans rolling in with their headlights off. Men climbed out, hauling crates into the basement like it was a warehouse. Not furniture, not boxes labeled family keepsakes. Heavy, locked crates. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You're playing with fire. We have your psych file. Want to see what it says? I stared at the screen, heat rushing up my neck. Someone had access to military archives. Someone wanted me rattled, branded unstable before I could even start. I didn't reply. I just hit forward once to Ruth, once to Isaac, my old comrade in cyber defense. Isaac's reply came 6 minutes later: pull everything, build the chain, don't wait. So I did. That night, my tiny apartment turned into a war room, 2 laptops running hot, drives spread across the table, folders open to every scrap of evidence we'd found. As midnight crept in, my anger solidified into clarity. Laura thought lying would end me. Brian thought fraud would profit him. And Dad thought silence would erase me. But they'd all made the same mistake. They forgot I was trained to fight battles no one else could see. The hum of my laptop fans was still in my ears when I parked outside the house again. I didn't bother hiding this time. I marched straight up the driveway, uniform crisp, folder of documents under my arm. If they wanted to play this out in whispers and forged signatures, fine, I'd bring it right to their front porch. Laura answered first, hair perfectly styled like she'd just stepped out of a salon, even though it was barely past breakfast. She looked me up and down with the kind of smirk that begged to be slapped off her face. You just don't quit, do you? She sneered. I held up the folder. I've got proof. Grandpa's video. The drive. You forged the deed. She laughed, actually laughed, then shouted over her shoulder. Dad. You'll want to hear this one. La. Charles appeared moments later, sharp suit, glass of scotch in hand like it was already cocktail hour. He looked at me like I was an uninvited guest at a country club. You've embarrassed yourself enough, Morgan, he said coldly. You chose your career over your family. That house belongs to Laura now. End of story. My jaw locked. I didn't choose between career and family. I served this country while you schemed paperwork in the shadows. Grandpa left the house to me, he said it. On video. That. Laura rolled her eyes. Oh, please. Grandpa barely knew what day it was at the end. You really think anyone's going to believe a shaky little home movie over certified documents? You're delusional. I took a step forward, folder tight in my grip. It's time-stamped. 3 days before he died. Clearer than anything you've ever signed your name to. For a second, Charles's eyes flickered. He knew what that meant. But instead of cracking, he leaned closer, voice low and poisonous. You don't get it, do you? In this family, perception is reality. You can wave your files around, but the neighbors saw you walk away in handcuffs. They see Laura running the household. They see Brian providing. You? You're the bitter soldier who came back with nothing. It hit like a slap. He didn't even deny the fraud. He just thought image would protect them. Then came the worst part. As I argued, a few neighbors started to gather on their lawns, pretending to water plants or fetch mail. I could hear Laura raising her voice intentionally, her words carrying just enough to reach across the street. She's unstable, she shouted, pointing at me. This is what the army did to her. She thinks she owns everything. She's dangerous. My blood boiled, but I stayed stone still. Losing my temper would hand them exactly the narrative they wanted. You've underestimated me before, I said calmly. you'll regret doing it again. Laura smirked wider, stepping close enough to whisper. You'll never win, Morgan. Because deep down, you know Dad never wanted you. He wanted a son, and he settled for you. I'm the daughter he actually respects. It was the kind of line meant to slice you open in front of an audience. And judging by the way Charles's mouth twitched, he didn't disagree. That humiliation burned hotter than any battle scar. It wasn't just the lie about the deed anymore, it was decades of dismissal distilled into one smug smirk. I didn't stay long enough for Brian to strut out and add his rehearsed arrogance to the mix. I turned on my heel, folder clutched tight, and walked away while Laura called after me loud enough for the neighbors to hear. See? She can't handle the truth. Walk away, soldier. You always do. Back in my car, my hands shook against the steering wheel. For a moment, I almost believed her, almost believed that the years I'd spent climbing through ranks, fighting shadows overseas, meant nothing here. But the drive in my bag said otherwise. Grandpa's voice, steady and intentional, would outlast their smirks. My phone buzzed, a message from Ruth. Meet me tonight, bring the drive. We're escalating this. I took one last look at the house. Curtains drawn again, porch lights still on in the middle of the day. It didn't look like a home anymore. It looked like a fortress built on lies. I shifted the car into gear, pulling away with the image of Laura's smirk burned into my brain. Humiliation was fuel. And if my family thought they'd broken me on that porch, they'd forgotten the one thing my service had carved into my bones: defeat isn't permanent. The porch humiliation was still crawling under my skin when I noticed a figure leaning against the fence down the block. He wasn't pretending to fetch mail or water plants like the others had. He was watching the house with the same suspicion I'd been carrying for weeks. I slowed as I passed him. Mid-40s, grease-stained jacket, ball cap pulled low. His eyes flicked toward me, steady, calculating. You're Whitfield, right? He asked, voice low but direct. I stopped, arms still stiff from gripping the folder. Who's asking? Name's Jack McMillan, I live 3 doors down, used to be a Marine, I knew your grandfather, hell of a man. He looked back at the house, jaw tightening. This whole thing stinks. And I don't mean just the family drama. I narrowed my eyes. What do you mean? He stepped closer, lowering his voice. I've seen things. Vans pulling up after midnight. No plates. Guys unloading crates into the basement. Always the same routine, Brian directing traffic like it's his warehouse. Your dad's there sometimes too. Never says a word, just stands with his arms crossed, watching. My stomach sank. What kind of crates? Jack shook his head. Heavy ones. Metal. Locked down tight. And after every drop, the house's power spikes like crazy. Lights flicker, the whole block feels it. They're running something down there. Something that doesn't belong in a family home. It fit too neatly with what Ruth and I had already uncovered: the shell company, the forged signatures, the suspicious contracts. This wasn't just a family betrayal anymore. It was bigger. Dirtier. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Jack's expression softened, just a fraction. Because I wore a uniform too. And I can't stand watching them drag your name through the mud while they run God knows what out of that basement. People around here whisper you're unstable. That's what your sister's been telling them. But I know the look of a soldier who's been burned, and you're not crazy, you're being played. The words hit harder than I expected. After days of being painted as unhinged, hearing someone believe me, someone who'd actually served, was like catching my breath after being held underwater. Jack pulled a slip of paper from his pocket and pressed it into my hand. Alley behind the hardware store. 11 tonight. You want proof? Meet me there, don't bring anyone else. Before I could ask another question, he was gone, walking briskly toward his truck without looking back. I drove off, the note burning in my palm. Part of me screamed it could be a setup, another trick to push me further off balance. But another part, the part that had followed encrypted chatter across continents, knew Jack wasn't lying. By the time night fell, my nerves were wired tight. I parked 2 blocks from the alley and walked the rest of the way, hands jammed in my coat pockets. The place reeked of oil and damp brick, chain link fences casting jagged shadows in the dim light. Jack was already there, arms crossed, posture relaxed like he'd done this 100 times. He nodded once. Good. You came. That. You'd better make this worth it, I muttered. He pointed down the alley. Wait. At 12:30, like clockwork, 2 black trucks rolled in with their headlights off. 4 men jumped out, moving with practiced efficiency. Brian led them, barking orders under his breath. My phone camera was already recording, zoomed in, timestamp glowing in the corner. We crouched behind a fence as they unloaded the crates. Jack leaned close, whispering, "Watch the tall one with gloves, he never speaks. He just supervises. Creeps me out every time." I zoomed in tighter, catching the gloved man's face as he turned slightly toward the light. Then came the voice I wasn't prepared for. Gravel-lined, slow, unmistakable. From inside the basement, carried through the vent, "If anyone finds out, cut her off completely." I froze. Jack looked at me, confused. It was my father's voice. Charles Whitfield wasn't just tolerating Brian's operation, he was leading it. My hands shook as I kept filming, every instinct screaming to charge down the alley and rip the vent open. But years of training held me still. Documentation first. Action later. That's how you win. After 20 minutes, the trucks pulled out, tail lights fading into the night. I exhaled for the first time, lowering my phone. "You heard it," I whispered. Jack nodded grimly. "Yeah. Your old man's in deep." We slipped out of the alley separately, no words exchanged. I walked back to my car with my chest on fire. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was conspiracy, stamped with my own bloodline. Back at my apartment, I replayed the footage, faces, crates, timestamps all there, and then I replayed the audio, over and over, until Charles's words felt like they were burned into my skull. "If anyone finds out, cut her off completely." He wasn't talking about some faceless enemy, he was talking about me. The rage was volcanic, but under it ran something sharper resolve. They could humiliate me, forge my name, call me unstable. But now I had more than suspicion. I had evidence. I uploaded copies to an encrypted drive and sent one straight to Ruth, another to Isaac. Their replies came within minutes. Ruth, "This is enough to file for an injunction." Isaac, "Chain the accounts, track every shell company." Now. I leaned back in my chair, exhaustion slamming into me like a wall. But I didn't shut down. Not yet. Because for the first time since stepping off that cab, I wasn't just reacting. I was on a fence. The video file of Grandpa's voice was still ringing in my ears when Ruth spread the rest of the evidence across her desk. My phone buzzed every few minutes with messages from Isaac, who was already digging through Brian's logistics connections. The deeper we looked, the dirtier it got. Stonebridge Holdings wasn't just a shell company, it was a laundering funnel. Ruth circled bank transfers on the printouts. Here, payments routed through 4 different accounts before landing in Stonebridge. Each one tied to federal supply contracts. And look at the amounts, rounded numbers, consistent with inflated invoices. It's textbook fraud. I rubbed my temples, scanning the totals. Millions, I muttered. And they did it using my name. My clearance, my reputation. Ruth leaned back, sighing. "This is bigger than probate court. If the feds connect you to those transactions, even by accident, you could be dragged into an investigation you don't deserve." I forced my voice steady. "Then we get ahead of it, we show them who's behind it before they try to pin it on me." Isaac called just then, his tone sharp and efficient. "Morgan, your sister's husband is sloppy. He left metadata trails on at least 3 procurement forms. Guess whose login codes were attached?" I already knew. "Mine." "Exactly. Except they're old codes, ones you stopped using before your discharge. That means someone pulled them from classified archives. You need to assume your father's contacts are deeper than you thought. This isn't just Brian freelancing." My hand clenched into a fist around the phone. "You're telling me Charles is feeding him intel?" "I'm telling you this runs high enough that the Department of Defense will take notice. so you'd better have everything locked down before they come asking. 1. I hung up, heart pounding. Betrayal from a sister was one thing. But my father feeding stolen codes into black market contracts? That wasn't just fraud. That was treason adjacent. That night, I set up a burner laptop in Ruth's office, patch cables and drives snaking across her table like a makeshift command center. If Laura and Brian wanted to smear me as unstable, fine. I'd look unstable typing at 3 a.m., but I'd have the receipts. By dawn, we had a timeline. The fake deed transfer. The forged will. The shell company's first deposits, and every step of the way, Laura and Brian's fingerprints were all over it, with Charles quietly signing off from the shadows. Ruth tapped the final page, voice firm. We file an emergency injunction tomorrow, freeze the property transfer, stop them from selling or mortgaging it, then we move to probate with the video as evidence. I exhaled slowly. For the first time in days, I felt like I was more than just reacting. I was counterattacking. But the relief didn't last long. Around noon, my phone buzzed again, a new message, no ID. You think paperwork saves you? Ask your CO why you were really discharged. I froze, staring at the words. They weren't just smearing me in the neighborhood anymore, they were digging at my military record, trying to twist the one part of my life that had never betrayed me. I shot the message to Isaac. His reply came quick. Ignore the noise. They're bluffing. No one in your command had cause to red flag you. Keep focus. Still, the seed was planted. If Charles's people had access to old clearance codes, who was to say they didn't have ways of spinning my record too? That paranoia simmered as I drove back toward the house, parked far enough away to stay unnoticed. Sure enough, by late afternoon, another van rolled up, same crates, same routine. Only this time, one of the men slipped and the crate cracked open just enough for me to see inside. It wasn't cash, it wasn't weapons. It was servers. Full towers, wrapped in foam, humming faintly as if they'd been running during transit. My gut twisted. They weren't just stealing money, they were building something digital, hidden, dangerous. I snapped photo after photo, zooming in on serial numbers, faces, timestamps. Then I pulled back before they noticed me, every nerve burning. Ruth's office smelled like stale coffee when I burst in, dropping the new photos onto her desk. She stared at them, brow furrowed. Servers? Why the hell would they be moving live servers into a basement? Because they're not running a family business, I said bitterly. They're running an operation. And my name is their shield. Ruth didn't argue. She just reached for her phone. We're filing that injunction tonight, before they bury anything deeper. The clock on her wall ticked loud, each second dragging the weight of years of family betrayal and weeks of escalating fraud. But under it, I felt something else. Momentum. The humiliation on the porch, the whispers in the neighborhood, the forged signatures, they weren't the end, they were just the spark. And now I had the fire. The courthouse steps were cold under my boots as Ruth handed me the emergency injunction paperwork. My name sat at the top in bold print, the kind of validation I hadn't seen in weeks. For the first time since Laura slammed that porch door in my face, the law was on my side at least temporarily. Once this is filed, they can't touch the property, Ruth said, sliding her pen across the signature line. They can't sell it, can't mortgage it, can't bury it in a trust. It's frozen until the probate court reviews Grandpa's original intent. I signed without hesitation, the pen biting into the page. My silence had gotten me humiliated on my own doorstep, smeared as unstable, erased from paper. Silence wasn't an option anymore. Revenge, not the petty kind, but the surgical, lawful kind, was the only path left. On the drive home, I replayed Laura's taunts, Dad's dismissive smirk, Brian's shadowy crates in the basement, every slight, every forged line on a deed, every whisper about me being dangerous, was fuel. If they wanted to call me unstable, fine. I'd show them what a stable response looked like: evidence, precision, exposure. Back in my apartment, I pulled the blinds shut and set up what looked more like a command post than a living room. My duffel bag, still half-packed from discharge, spilled over with cables, hard drives, and the encrypted tablet Grandpa had trusted me with. 2 laptops hummed, one on Ruth's documents, the other synced to Isaac's secure channel. Isaac's message popped up. We traced 3 shell accounts back to a defense subcontractor in Nevada. Guess who signed off on the procurement? Brian, I muttered. Bingo. And your father witnessed 2 of them. Paper trails strong, just keep collecting. I leaned back, staring at the glowing screens. This wasn't just family fraud, this was federal crime committed in my name. Silence would mean complicity. Speaking up meant war. The knock at my door startled me. My hand went instinctively to my side, where for 12 years a service pistol had rested. Now it was just reflex. I opened the door cautiously. Jack McMillan stood there, hands shoved in his jacket. I figured you'd be up, he said simply. I stepped aside, motioning him in. He didn't waste time. I talked to one of the delivery guys. Off the record, of course. He slipped up after a few beers. Said Brian bragged about having military clearance codes to grease contracts. That sound familiar? I clenched my jaw. They're mine. Or were. Old ones. Jack whistled low. Then he's not just running fraud, he's compromising national security. You know what that means. I nodded slowly. I know exactly what that means. And I'm not staying quiet about it. Jack studied me a moment, then gave a single approving nod. Good. Silence just lets them write the story for you. You've got evidence. Use it. His words echoed what I already knew. I'd been trained to analyze threats, to dismantle them piece by piece. This wasn't different, except the battlefield was a courtroom, and the enemy wore my last name. By midnight, Ruth had the injunction officially filed. My phone buzzed with her text. It's done. They'll be served in the morning. I almost smiled, picturing Laura's face when a process server handed her the papers. But beneath that satisfaction was something heavier. Revenge wasn't about seeing her shocked expression, it was about reclaiming the dignity she tried to strip from me. I opened Grandpa's video file again, just to hear his voice. His words weren't just comfort anymore, they were orders. Orders I intended to follow through. You've earned it, he'd said. I whispered back at the screen. And I'll prove it. The choice was made. Silence was gone. Revenge calculated, relentless was the mission now. The city was quiet outside, snow starting to fall against the window pane. I watched the flakes drift and settle, the world peaceful for a moment, but inside me, the storm had already broken loose. The knock on Laura's door came at 9 sharp the next morning. I sat in my car across the street, coffee going cold in the cup holder, watching as the process server handed her the injunction. She opened it, eyes flicking fast across the page, then slammed the door hard enough to rattle the porch light. Even from here, I could see the rage burning on her face. For once, she wasn't the one in control. But freezing the deed wasn't enough. They could stall, spin, distract. If I wanted to end this, I needed more than paperwork. I needed undeniable proof, something even Charles's smirk or Brian's fake contracts couldn't talk around. That's where the cameras came in. Jack had suggested it, half joking, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. If fans kept unloading servers at midnight, catching them on film would be a kill shot. By sunset, I had 2 motion-triggered cameras hidden across the street, one tucked in the branches of a maple, another disguised as a busted floodlight on a neighbor's garage. Both fed directly to a secure cloud Isaac set up for me. The first night, nothing happened. Just Laura pacing the living room, wine glass in hand, and Charles sitting stiffly in his recliner like a self-appointed king. The second night, though, the trap sprung. At 1:14 a.m., 2 black vans crept down the street, headlights off, my camera lit up, infrared capturing every frame. 4 men climbed out, one of them Brian, his smug profile impossible to miss. They heaved crates out of the van, grunting under the weight, then carried them straight through the side entrance. But it wasn't just the delivery, it was what happened after. One of the men pulled out his phone, flashlight briefly sweeping the driveway. For 2 seconds, the light hit the crate lid. Clear as day, stamped in bold government font, property of U.S. Department of Defense. I nearly dropped my own phone watching the feed. This wasn't just fraud anymore. This was theft of federal property, on camera, in my grandfather's house. I saved the footage to 3 separate drives, my heart hammering. Then I zoomed in on Brian's face, frame by frame. There was no way he could spin this. He wasn't just adjacent to fraud, he was caught, red-handed, unloading stolen equipment. By dawn, Ruth was already at her desk, hair pulled back, eyes sharp. I slid the laptop toward her, the footage looping silently. She leaned forward, face tightening with every second. When the lid flashed Department of Defense, she exhaled low. Well, that's the ball game. The parting. Her tone was calm, but the weight in her words said everything. I leaned on the desk. We take this to court? She shook her head. We take this to federal investigators. Probate court is small potatoes now. With this, it's not just about who owns a house, it's about a federal crime operating inside that house. And if Brian goes down, Laura and Charles go with him. I swallowed hard. Revenge had been personal. Now it was national. Isaac called minutes later, his voice practically vibrating with urgency. Morgan, do not sit on this. That footage is dynamite. I've got contacts who'll move fast, but you need to be careful. If they even suspect you're the one who filmed it, they'll try to burn you before it gets out. I asked the question hanging on my tongue. Burn me how? His silence was answer enough. Finally, he said, psych records, service files, whatever angle they can. But once this footage hits the right hands, no smear campaign can stop it. That was the moment everything shifted. For weeks, I'd been on the defensive explaining, proving, justifying, now the weight was in my hands. And it wasn't just enough to stop them. It was enough to bury them. Still, the soldier in me stayed cautious. Evidence wasn't just about catching the enemy, it was about securing it. I drove 2 towns over, bought 3 more encrypted drives in cash, and saved the footage again. Then I mailed 1 copy to Isaac, another to a retired JAG officer I trusted, and locked the 3rd in a bank deposit box. If Laura thought she could scream unstable and make me disappear, she was about to learn the hard way. Unstable doesn't back up evidence 6 different ways. That evening, I drove past the house again, slow, steady, curtains closed, lights dimmed. I wondered if Laura knew yet that the footage existed. I wondered if Charles had even considered that the same military training he dismissed for years had taught me exactly how to outmaneuver him. For the first time since stepping back into Boulder, I wasn't just fighting for the house. I was fighting to make sure my name, the one they tried to steal, would be tied forever to the moment their empire of lies collapsed. And the collapse was coming. The footage of Brian unloading crates stamped property of U.S. Department of Defense replayed in my head as I dragged another folding table into my apartment. My living room looked less like a home and more like an ops center by the hour. Maps on the wall, timelines scribbled across whiteboards, photos taped side by side. Grandpa's video testimony. Bank transfers Ruth had traced. Jack's notes on the late-night deliveries. Every scrap of data laid out like pieces of an enemy playbook. It wasn't chaos. It was strategy. Jack showed up first, carrying a 6-pack and a file box. He dropped it onto the table with a grunt. Pulled some notes from neighbors who've seen the vans. Nobody wants to go on record, but once the feds get involved, these statements will back you up. Good, I said, scanning through his scribbles. Times, dates, license plate fragments, all consistent with the footage I already had. Ruth arrived next, laptop balanced under one arm, a stack of legal pads under the other. She didn't even sit before firing up her screen. I spoke with a contact at the state attorney's office. They won't touch this yet, they want airtight evidence. But they told me, unofficially, if we can tie the servers to federal contracts, they'll open the door to Homeland Security. Isaac joined last, patching in on a secure video call. His voice crackled through the speaker, calm but sharp. I traced the servers. Serial numbers match units shipped to a Nevada base last quarter. Those units should never have left government custody. If Brian and your father are moving them, we're looking at theft of federal assets, not just fraud. The room went still. Even Jack, who usually smirked his way through everything, sat up straighter. Which means, Isaac continued, this is no longer a family feud, this is a federal case, and Morgan, you're the only one with both motive and credibility to blow it open. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same family that branded me unstable had accidentally handed me the power to dismantle them with my stability, my training, my record, my meticulous evidence gathering. I leaned over the table, palms flat against the maps. Then we stop thinking like this is probate court, we treat it like an operation, roles, objectives, timelines. Jack grinned. Finally speaking my language. We divided tasks. Jack would keep eyes on the house, logging every van, every face. Ruth would handle the injunction follow-up and prepare filings for probate being our cover story while the bigger case built steam. Isaac would continue tracing digital fingerprints, building the chain from the stolen servers back to Stonebridge Holdings. And me? I'd coordinate, document, and prepare to testify. Not as a bitter sibling, but as a soldier with evidence. By midnight, the whiteboard glowed under a single desk lamp. At the top, in bold black letters, I'd written, objective, expose and neutralize. I stepped back, arms crossed, taking in the mess that somehow felt cleaner than my entire family history. For the first time, I wasn't drowning in their lies. I was standing above them, connecting the dots. Jack cracked open another beer, leaning back in his chair. You know, they're not gonna see this coming. People like Brian think money makes them untouchable. People like Charles think reputation shields them. They don't know what it's like to face someone trained to win without glory. I didn't answer. I just adjusted one of the photos, Laura's smug face at the porch, side by side with the grainy still of her husband unloading stolen property. My phone buzzed on the table. A new message, unknown number, you're making a mistake. Families don't forgive this kind of betrayal. I stared at the words, then slowly smiled. They still thought silence was my weakness. They hadn't realized silence was the weapon I just put down. Let them text, I muttered, sliding the phone aside. Every threat is just another log on the fire. Ruth glanced up from her notes. You're not second-guessing this, are you? Not for a second, I said firmly. They wanted me erased. Now they'll be remembered for the only thing they actually earned exposure. The war room buzzed with quiet focus. Papers shuffled, keyboards tapped, Jack scribbled another note about a van sighting. It felt almost ordinary, like prepping for a mission overseas. Except this battlefield was Boulder, Colorado, and the enemy was the family I'd once saluted at holiday dinners. As the clock pushed past 2 a.m, I tightened the marker cap on the whiteboard and forced myself to breathe. This wasn't revenge for the sake of satisfaction. This was revenge as survival. Revenge as truth. Revenge as justice. And with every piece of evidence pinned to the wall, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: silence had ended. The war had begun. The courthouse lobby smelled like old wood polish and stale coffee, the kind of scent that clung to every government building I'd ever walked into. I adjusted the collar of my jacket, not the uniform this time, but a plain black suit Ruth insisted on. You need to look like the professional you are, not like you're still reporting for duty, she had said. I'd argued, then gave in. She was right. Laura and Brian were already inside when I walked through security. Laura's hair was perfect, her pearl earrings catching the fluorescent light. She smirked as if she had already won. Brian wore his usual slick suit, adjusting his tie every 30 seconds like it was a nervous tick. And Charles sat beside them, posture ramrod straight, projecting that same boardroom authority he used to rule the family. Ruth leaned close as we passed them. Don't take the bait, she whispered. I kept my eyes forward, even as Laura's voice floated after me. Careful, Morgan, courts don't like unstable veterans, might not end well. Her words were meant to sting, but instead they steadied me. The more she leaned on that lie, the more desperate she sounded. Inside the probate courtroom, the judge, a man with silver hair and sharp glasses, took his seat. Papers shuffled, the clerk called the case, and suddenly, my family's betrayal wasn't whispered gossip or neighborhood drama. It was on the record. Brian's attorney started first, painting Laura as the responsible sibling who stepped in to manage the estate while I was absent and unreachable during military service. He waved the forged will like it was gospel, describing me as someone who had abandoned family obligations and only returned to claim property she never contributed to. Lie. I clenched my jaw, but Ruth placed a hand on my arm, steadying me. Wait, she mouthed. Then she stood. Calm, precise, no theatrics. Your Honor, opposing counsel is correct about one thing. My client was serving her country. What he leaves out is that her grandfather explicitly left her this property. And we have proof. She clicked a remote, and the screen beside the bench lit up. Grandpa appeared, frail but clear-eyed, timestamp visible. His voice filled the room. This house goes to Morgan. She served her country. She earned it. I want no one else trying to interfere. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Laura's smirk faltered, Brian shifted in his chair, and even Charles's jaw twitched. The judge leaned forward. This video was taken 3 days before his death? Yes, Your Honor, Ruth replied. With original metadata intact, verified by independent experts. In addition, we have evidence that the deed transfer filed afterward was forged, notarized by a suspended officer, and funneled through a shell company tied to Brian Calloway. Brian's attorney tried to object, but Ruth pressed forward, sliding photos across the table. The late-night van deliveries, the crates marked property of U.S. Department of Defense. This is no longer just a probate matter, Ruth said firmly. This is fraud, theft of federal property, and an attempt to erase my client's identity through forged documents. Gasps rippled through the courtroom gallery. Reporters had slipped in, drawn by whispers of the Whitfield name, and now their pens scratched furiously across notepads. Laura snapped, voice shrill. This is lies. That video's fake. She probably made it on her army computers. Enough, the judge cut her off. His voice was sharp, commanding. You will remain silent until spoken to. For once, Laura froze. I sat there, spine straight, hands folded, forcing every ounce of discipline I'd learned in uniform into my composure. Inside, my chest burned with satisfaction. Years of being dismissed, ridiculed, erased, now it was their turn to squirm under the weight of truth. The judge scribbled notes, then looked up. The court will grant the injunction and freeze all transactions on this property. Further, given the evidence presented, this matter will be referred to federal authorities for investigation into potential fraud and theft. Until such matters are resolved, this court recognizes Captain Morgan Whitfield as the rightful heir to 1,450 Windmere Lane. The gavel struck. For a split second, the sound was all I heard. A sharp crack that felt like a fracture in decades of silence. Ruth touched my arm again, her voice low. That's the first domino. They're finished. Eustace. I glanced at Laura, her face had gone pale, fury trembling under her skin. Brian muttered something under his breath, sweat beading on his temple. And Charles, he simply stared at me, eyes cold, calculating, already plotting his next move. But plotting didn't matter anymore. Not when the system was in motion, not when the evidence was documented 6 ways over. As I walked out of the courthouse, reporters shouted questions, microphones shoved in my face. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The footage, the video, the judge's words, they spoke louder than anything I could have said. I stepped into the sunlight, the weight of the house, the name, and the lies lifting, if only slightly. For the first time, the battlefield wasn't tilted against me. And this time, I wasn't walking away. The courthouse air was heavy with whispers when we reconvened 2 days later. Word had spread fast about the video, the forged deed, the crates marked with federal seals. The gallery was fuller now, reporters packed shoulder to shoulder, their pens and cameras ready to devour every misstep. Laura strutted in wearing a tailored red blazer, the kind of outfit meant to scream confidence, but her eyes darted like a cornered animal's. Brian looked worse, sallow, sweating, his collar too tight. Charles, as always, wore his poker face, though his clenched jaw betrayed the pressure. I sat with Ruth at our table, evidence folders stacked neatly, my posture as steady as if I were back in uniform. Inside, my pulse hammered, but I let discipline cover it like armor. The judge called the session to order, voice sharp over the murmurs. This hearing will address the validity of the Whitfield property transfer and allegations of fraud tied to Stonebridge Holdings. Brian's attorney stood, his tone oily. Your Honor, my clients categorically deny any wrongdoing. The so-called video testimony is unreliable, and the photographs of supposed government property are taken out of context. This is nothing more than a disgruntled sibling trying to rewrite history. Ruth rose smoothly. With respect, this isn't about sibling rivalry, this is about evidence. She clicked the remote, and the screen flickered to life again, images of Brian and his crew unloading crates. The freeze frame of the bold lettering glared across the courtroom. Property of U.S. Department of Defense. Gasps rippled. Reporters scribbled furiously. The judge adjusted his glasses, eyes narrowing. That's when Laura broke. This isn't your house, she screamed, leaping to her feet and jabbing a finger at me. Her voice cracked, shrill enough to echo off the paneled walls. You don't deserve it. You were never part of this family. You abandoned us, and now you think you can just waltz back in with your fake videos and your sob stories? The gallery erupted into murmurs, cameras snapping like machine gun fire. Brian grabbed her arm, whispering harshly, but she yanked free, face flushed. The judge's gavel slammed down, cracking the chaos. Order. Order in this court. His voice cut through the noise like a whip. The room fell into uneasy silence. He turned a hard stare on Laura. You will sit down and remain silent. One more outburst, and I will have you removed. For the first time in her life, Laura froze. Her mouth opened, then shut, eyes darting around as if realizing the whole world had just witnessed her unravel. She sank into her chair, hands trembling against the table. The judge looked to Ruth. Continue. Ruth's voice was calm, precise, almost surgical. The outburst we just witnessed illustrates exactly why my client has been targeted. Smears, intimidation, manipulation. But the facts remain unchanged. The deed was forged, the will altered, and stolen government property moved into the Whitfield home under the cover of night. This is not family drama, this is organized fraud. The judge leaned back, hands steepled. He looked at Charles then, eyes narrowing further. Mr. Whitfield, you were present for these transfers, were you not? Charles cleared his throat, voice low. I oversaw some estate matters. I wasn't aware of what was in the crates. It was the first crack in his armor, and the reporters smelled blood. Pens scratched faster, lenses zoomed closer. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. For once, silence was power. The judge shuffled papers, then tapped his gavel lightly. This court finds sufficient cause to freeze all Whitfield estate assets pending further federal investigation. Additionally, Stonebridge Holdings will be referred to the Department of Justice for review. Laura's face went white. Brian slumped in his chair, muttering curses under his breath. Charles sat perfectly still, though his knuckles whitened on the table edge. The judge's gaze shifted to me. Captain Whitfield, while the federal matters will proceed separately, this court acknowledges your grandfather's recorded intent and recognizes you as the rightful heir of the property in question. The gavel struck once more, firm and final. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt, the sound reverberating through every nerve in my body. I had faced combat zones quieter than that courtroom. Reporters surged forward as the judge exited, shouting questions, flashes stinging my eyes. Laura sat stone-faced, lips pressed so tight they looked bloodless. Brian avoided eye contact altogether. And Charles, he simply lowered his head, the gesture subtle but unmistakable. Humiliation had finally reached him. I rose, gathering my files, and walked out without a word. The cameras followed, but all I felt was the steady rhythm of my boots on the marble floor. For once, each step wasn't weighed down by erasure or doubt. Each step was mine. The courthouse steps were buzzing with reporters when Ruth and I emerged into the cold afternoon air. Microphones shot out like bayonets, voices overlapping, each question sharper than the last. Captain Whitfield, how long did your family run Stonebridge? Did you know your father was involved? Are you planning to press charges against your sister? I kept my gaze forward, jaw tight. Soldiers are trained to answer only what's necessary, and right now, the only necessary response was silence. Ruth handled it with her lawyer's poise, saying only, "All questions will be addressed in due time, thank you." Behind us, the doors swung open again. Laura stormed out, red blazer wrinkled, hair falling out of its perfect curls. Reporters swarmed her next, but instead of calm deflection, she exploded. "She's lying, all of it. My sister's unstable, ask anyone in this neighborhood. She forged that video, she planted those crates. She's been obsessed with destroying me since we were kids." The cameras caught every shrill word. Flashbulbs popped, and the crowd pressed closer. Brian tried to tug her toward the car, but she kept yelling, veins bulging in her neck. "This isn't over, you'll all see she's dangerous." The scene looked less like a legal defense and more like a breakdown broadcast live. Even Charles, trailing behind, didn't step in to calm her. He just walked stiffly, eyes down, shoulders rigid. Ruth leaned toward me as we reached her car. Let her scream, every word digs her hole deeper. She was right. By that evening, the headlines were brutal. Whitfield family feud explodes in courtroom showdown. Sister screams as judge freezes Whitfield assets. Military veteran exposes fraud in Boulder estate battle. The narrative had shifted. For years, Laura and Charles controlled the perception, painting me as absent, unstable, unworthy. Now the cameras had turned, and the cracks in their facade were spreading fast. But the collapse didn't stop at bad press. 2 days later, Jack knocked on my apartment door holding a folded flyer. "This was taped to the church bulletin board," he said, dropping it on my table. I unfolded it. A letter signed by half a dozen community members, condemning the Whitfields for dishonoring the memory of Walter Whitfield and profiting off deception. The neighbors weren't buying Laura's narrative anymore. They were siding with Grandpa and with me. Jack smirked. "People can forgive a lot in this town. But stealing from a veteran? Lying about a soldier's service? That doesn't wash." Meanwhile, Isaac kept feeding me updates from his end. Stonebridge's accounts were unraveling under scrutiny. Subcontractors were quietly lawyering up. One even sent Ruth an anonymous packet of invoices, all doctored with my clearance codes. The deeper it went, the clearer it became. Laura and Brian weren't criminal masterminds. They were sloppy opportunists propped up by Charles's arrogance. The DOJ officially opened their investigation that same week. Federal agents appeared at the Whitfield home, their black SUVs parked out front while neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Laura screamed again, this time not at me but at the agents rifling through her files. Brian tried to act cooperative, but sweat poured down his face as boxes of documents left the house. Charles stayed inside. Rumors spread that he refused to come to the door until they threatened to force it. That night, my phone buzzed with messages from old acquaintances I hadn't heard from in years. Former classmates. Distant cousins. Even a couple of officers I'd served under. All saying the same thing, "We saw the news, we're proud of you." It felt strange, after weeks of being painted as invisible, to suddenly be seen so clearly. But not all the fallout was satisfying. Mom finally called, her voice trembled on the line, worn and thin. "Morgan, I didn't know it was this bad." I didn't know how to answer. For years, she'd stayed quiet, letting Charles run the household, letting Laura's lies grow unchecked. Maybe she hadn't signed the papers, but her silence had been its own betrayal. Still, I kept my tone steady. "Now you know." She started to cry, whispering that she never wanted it to come to this. I closed my eyes, hand tight around the phone. Neither did I. But they made sure it would. When I hung up, the room felt heavier than any courtroom. Revenge had power, but it also left scars. By the weekend, the fallout was undeniable. Brian's employer suspended him pending the investigation. Laura was uninvited from 2 charity boards she loved to flaunt about. And Charles, the man who once controlled every room he entered, avoided public appearances altogether. The family's reputation, the one they'd weaponized against me for decades, was collapsing under the weight of truth. And I didn't lift a finger to force it. I just showed the evidence. The silence after the storm hit harder than I expected. The court had ruled, the DOJ had stepped in, and the headlines painted my family as frauds instead of heroes. Laura was under house arrest with a GPS ankle monitor, Brian had already taken a plea deal to avoid a longer sentence, and Charles the proud patriarch was facing the prospect of federal prison at 70. By all accounts, I had won. But late at night, staring at the ceiling of my empty apartment, I didn't feel like a winner. Revenge burns hot, but when the fire dies down, you're left with ashes. Ruth noticed it first. We were at a diner downtown, the kind with cracked leather booths and coffee that tastes like it's been brewing since the Carter administration. She slid a file across the table, follow-up paperwork on the injunction. "You look restless," she said matter-of-factly. I shrug. Habit. 20 years in uniform doesn't turn off overnight. She stirred her coffee. It's more than habit. You've been on defense since the moment you came home, courtrooms, investigations, family drama, that's not sustainable. She was right, and I hated that she was right. The Army had given me a mission every day of my adult life. Even when I was deployed in Kabul, running comms in a plywood shack, I had a purpose. Now? The war was over, the house was frozen, my family scattered. What was left to fight for? Isaac, of course, had a solution. One evening he barged into my apartment carrying a pizza box and his laptop. "You're rotting in here," he announced, kicking off his boots like he owned the place. "Lucky for you, I've got an idea." He pulled up a deck on his screen, private sector contracts, cyber defense, companies are begging for leadership with real-world military experience, and not the PowerPoint kind, actual field discipline. I leaned back in my chair. "So you're recruiting me?" "Recruiting?" He smirked. "I'm practically drafting you. Think about it, half the guys we served with are drifting. You've got credibility, you've got discipline, and thanks to this mess with your family, you've got a public profile whether you like it or not." I wanted to dismiss it, but something in his pitch clicked. Maybe it was the word discipline, maybe it was the thought of shaping something instead of just tearing down. Still, I wasn't ready to say yes. That week, I drove past the house on Pinebrook Road. It stood there, stripped of warmth, a property seize notice taped to the door. I didn't get out of the car. I just sat, staring, until the memories soured. That place would never be home again. It had been poisoned too deeply. And maybe that was the point. Home wasn't about reclaiming old ground, it was about building new ground. 2 days later, I met Ethan at his auto shop. He was hunched over an engine, grease smeared across his arms, when I walked in. "You look lighter," he said without looking up. "Do I?" He tightened a bolt, then straightened. "Yeah. First time I saw you, you looked like a soldier without a mission. Now? You've got something in your eyes again." I didn't argue. We stood there a while, the smell of oil and metal thick around us. Finally, I said, "You ever think about legacy?" Ethan laughed. "Legacy, lady? I'm just trying to keep these clunkers running another 5 years. But then he grew serious. "Your legacy isn't a house, it's not even revenge, it's what people remember after you're gone. And right now, you've got folks remembering that you stood up when no one else would." That stuck with me. The next morning, I called Isaac. "All right," I told him. "I'll hear your pitch, no promises." He grinned through the phone. "That's all I needed, meet me at the warehouse tomorrow." The warehouse turned out to be a half-renovated office space near the tech corridor. Exposed brick walls, folding chairs, cheap desks. A handful of young analysts sat hunched over laptops, arguing about firewall protocols. They looked more like college kids pulling an all-nighter than a defense team. Isaac clapped me on the back. "This is the crew. Smart, but green. They need someone who knows what it's like when systems fail in real time." One of the kids looked up. "Wait, you're the officer from the Whitfield trial, aren't you?" I froze for a second. Hearing it out loud felt strange. But Isaac jumped in. "Yep. And she's here to make sure none of you crash and burn when things get messy." Their eyes widened, some nervous, some impressed. I felt the old weight of command settle on my shoulders again, not unwelcome this time. As the day wore on, I walked the room, scanning their work, asking questions. It felt like being back in a command post, chaos everywhere, but manageable chaos if you set the tone. When I left that evening, Isaac grinned. "So, what do you think?" I didn't give him a straight answer. But for the first time since walking away from Pinebrook Road, I felt a spark of direction. The battle with my family had ended. But maybe a new mission was just beginning. The hum of servers filled the renovated warehouse, a steady rhythm that reminded me of operations centers overseas. Only this time, the battlefield wasn't Kabul or Baghdad, it was a row of mismatched desks in Colorado, where young analysts argued about intrusion detection like it was life or death. Isaac walked past me with a grin. "They're rough around the edges, but they'll get there, especially with you writing them." He wasn't wrong. Within a month, I had rewritten their protocols, drilled them through breach simulations, and taught them to stop saying, "good enough." In the military, good enough got people killed. Here, it could bankrupt companies and shut down hospitals. Discipline didn't go out of style just because the uniform did. Word spread fast. Other veterans started showing up, some with cyber skills, some without, all carrying scars. One of the first was Jackson, a Marine barely 30, who admitted he'd been sleeping in his truck after discharge. "My family doesn't want me around," he muttered during our first talk. I looked him in the eye and said, "Then we'll make you a new one." He stayed, and within weeks, he was leading drills like he'd been born for it. We called the program Project Sentinel. The name stuck, and soon enough, veterans were lining up to join. Some were cyber specialists. Some had never touched a keyboard but knew how to stay calm when everything else went to hell. That was enough for me. One evening, after a brutal 14-hour day, I drove past the old house on Pinebrook Road. The government notice was still taped to the front door. The windows were dark, the yard overgrown. It looked less like a home and more like a mausoleum for every lie my family told. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. For the first time, I realized it no longer had any hold on me. Home wasn't where betrayal lived, home was where you built something worth protecting. That became my mission. Ruth dropped by often, sometimes with legal updates, sometimes with takeout. She fit into the chaos like she'd been part of it from the start. One night, sitting on the balcony of my apartment with cartons of cold lo mein, she asked quietly, "Do you ever think about forgiveness?" The question cut deeper than she knew. Forgiveness. The word felt heavy, almost impossible. "Not for them," I finally said. "But maybe for myself." She didn't push. She just squeezed my hand, and for the first time in years, I let myself believe that maybe I didn't have to carry all of it alone. The real turning point came that spring. A cyber attack rolled through 3 states, targeting emergency networks and hospitals. Our ragtag team was pulled in as backup. For 48 hours straight, we fought like hell, patching vulnerabilities, countering intrusions, stabilizing critical systems. Jackson passed out at his desk at one point, and I barked at him until he got back up. We couldn't afford failure. Lives depended on us. When the breach was finally contained, dawn broke across the warehouse. My team erupted in cheers, exhausted but triumphant. I stepped outside, gulped the cold morning air, and realized something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. This was my battlefield now, and these were my soldiers. Not long after, I got an invitation to testify before Congress, this time not as a silent officer decoding acronyms, but as someone who had lived the consequences of oversight failures. I told them the truth: if a family fraud operation in suburban Colorado could exploit military credentials, imagine what a hostile nation could do. I didn't sugarcoat it. The room went still when I finished. Afterward, a reporter asked me what drives me now. I answered simply, making sure no one gets erased again. That phrase stuck. Veterans groups picked it up, forums repeated it, even schools invited me to speak. Suddenly, I wasn't just the soldier whose family betrayed her. I was a mentor, a builder, someone proving that scars could be armor. Laura wrote me letters from prison. At first, I ignored them. Then, one day, I opened one. The handwriting was shaky. She admitted Dad had twisted her, Brian had pulled her deeper, but she still made her choices. She didn't ask for forgiveness, she just said she was sorry. I didn't write back. Not yet. But I didn't throw it away either. Maybe forgiveness wasn't about them at all. Maybe it was about letting myself breathe again. That fall, Project Sentinel held its first graduation. 30 men and women stood with certificates in hand, their families cheering in a rented hall. I spoke at the podium, uniform jacket pressed, but voice softer than usual. You came here thinking you were defined by what you lost. But today, you walk out as proof that resilience is louder than betrayal. The applause thundered, but I only felt stillness, the good kind. Watching them smile, seeing hope on their faces, I realized this was victory. Not the courtroom. Not the headlines. This. Passing the torch. Building a legacy stronger than the lies my family tried to bury me under. That night, we crowded into my new house near the river. Ruth brought wine, Isaac brought barbecue, Ethan showed up greasy from the shop, veterans filled the porch swing, kids ran in the yard. It was loud, messy, imperfect, exactly the way family should be. I stood there with a glass in hand, looking at the faces around me. For years, I thought my story ended on Pinebrook Road, locked out and erased. But standing on that porch, laughter echoing across the yard, I finally understood. Legacy isn't stone or ink, it isn't a name on a deed. Legacy is the people who carry your lessons forward. And mine was just beginning. In the end, what mattered wasn't a house, a will, or even the courtroom verdict. What mattered was that I stood my ground, refused to be erased, and built a life that couldn't be stolen. That's the truth behind every one of these family revenge stories. Revenge isn't about destroying others, it's about reclaiming yourself. My family drama nearly broke me, but it also gave me the chance to rebuild something stronger. If there's one thing to take away, it's this: no betrayal is final unless you let it be. If you found this story powerful and want to hear more revenge stories filled with family betrayal, justice, and resilience, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below and let me know what part of this journey hit you the hardest. I'd love to hear your thoughts.